Hi, welcome to my podcast, Becoming a Cut Flower Grower. I'm your host, Lydia, and I'm here to share my year of growing and selling cut flowers. I'll be giving you the lowdown on everything I'm doing and sharing all the highs and lows, the good times and the inevitable disasters, all in real time. Join me on my cut flower journey, starting right now. Well, hello and good morning. It is the most beautiful, sunshiny day today, which makes me incredibly happy because we didn't have any sunshine over the weekend and it was so miserable. So I'm up here at the chickens to let everybody out, and I missed them so much while I was away. As you know, I popped up to Worcester for a couple of days to see my dad, and I have a wonderful lady who comes and looks after them for me. But I miss them enormously. So let's get everybody out and breakfasted. Good morning. Hello, everybody. Come on, guys. Come on, little ones. There's a Molly. Molly's my VIP that has to be lifted down off her perch every morning because she can't make it down by herself anymore. So we've got duck eggs all over the place, have we? Interesting. Right. Okay. And have we still got a broody lady? Oh, we do. Kylie. Hello, my darling. Hello, Kylie. Oh, what are you saying? What are you saying, huh? So Kylie's one of last year's babies, and she's decided pretty much at the coldest time of the year that she wants to be a mum, which is a little bit inconvenient. It's far too early in the year for her to do anything, and also she's not even laying at the moment. So she's literally just been sat in a nest box for 10 days, being very aggressive, not coming out, not stretching her legs, not taking care of herself, which is what happens. But she's not actually laying any eggs, so there's no possibility of any babies. So we need to sort that out. Hey, everybody. Oh, they've helped themselves to breakfast. Hey, it's not a buffet. You're supposed to wait. Oh, you guys are so naughty. Let's put this down on the floor for everybody. So I'm very excited to be up here today. I'm going to have a good old look at the plot, even though it looks quite frozen, and just do a bit of a check on what's going on. And then I'm going to come back a bit later and have a talk to you. So, I'll catch you later. All right, well, I've decided to talk to you from the warmth of my car because it is absolutely freezing outside. And if you've listened to a previous episode, you'll know I'm always moaning about my car thermometer, which is saying it's 10 degrees outside today. And there's absolutely no way. That is a blatant lie. So I thought I'll come and hide in the car with the dog and we'll look at the plot from out of my windscreen. And it's all looking very crispy in there, and I'm not going to go in and trample on anything. So we get the sun in the afternoon here. So around about midday, it gets up behind the trees, and then we get all of the afternoon and the evening sun. So it's always quite unpleasant here first thing in the morning. Even in the height of summer, we get a lot of dew on the grass. So it's kind of cold and wet even in the summer, and it's especially bitter today. So I'm going to start off with a question from a listener. Now, this one has come in from Shirley from Essex, and she had a question about how to make weeding easier. So I thought I'll talk about that for a little bit, which weeds you need to prioritize, which you don't really need to worry about, what to do with them, how to dispose of them. And this applies whether you've got an allotment, a plot, a field, tubs you're using, your garden, whatever space you're using in. So I think there are three main types of weeds. You've got your perennial weeds, which is things like nettles, ground elder, bindweed, mare's tail, which are the really invasive ones. They have very deep roots and they spread all over the place, and they're quite tricky to manage, but not impossible by any means. Then you've got what I call just like normal weeds, and I'd put in that things like dandelions, which aren't really, they are a weed, but they're not a problem for me because the ducks love them, so, and the chickens love them, so I dig them up and give them to the chickens. And then you've got weeds like your ephemeral weeds, which are ones which can have multiple um, babies, if you like. Oh, what's the word for it? I've lost my thought train this morning. Weeds that will self-sow and have um, multiple appearances during the year. So it's not just one plant that will last all year. They'll have a couple of goes, their babies will have a couple of goes, their babies will have a couple of goes, and they can just fill your entire plot within a season very quickly. So let me talk about the three ones that you need to worry about. So things like bindweed, nettles, ground elder, they need digging up very carefully, because if you leave any part of the root behind, it will make a new plant. So when you dig them up, you have to be very careful that if you do break off any bits of the root, you need to go hunting for those bits and get them up as well. Now, I find that ground elder and bindweed and nettles are actually quite straightforward and easy to dig up. You just have to be very methodical about it. You have to watch where you put your feet, don't trample on anything, and just work. Well, I worked right to left last year, and just take your time and just get every little bit up. Now, those weeds, I don't compost them, and I don't burn them or drown them or any of the other things that you can do with them. I just put them in a big pile on the edge of the plot and just leave them, because they will just rot down. As long as they're out of the way, that's the priority for me. So don't waste your time trying to do anything complicated with these weeds. Now, some people do bag them up in black sacks and take them off site or just throw them in the bin. You can do that, but if you just leave them in a pile, they will just rot down. But just obviously make sure they don't then use that as base camp and start spreading off. But they're the really important ones. Now, if you start off growing annuals, you don't need to stress too much about getting every single last millimetre of roots up, because as the season goes on, you can keep digging them up where they crop up. You're bound to miss a few bits. We're only human. So don't worry too much about that. But if you're going to go straight in with perennials, then you have got to make sure that you get every single bit of root out, because what you don't want is things like bindweed and ground elder and nettles growing around your perennials roots, because they will strangle them, they'll compete for resources and water, and it'll get out of control. And what you'll end up having to do is lift your perennials, clear all the weeds off them, and start again, basically. And that is a waste of your time. So if you've got a particularly bad patch, then clear it, put annuals on it, and after a couple of years, when you know that you've got all those weeds off it, then you could put your perennials in, or even your shrubs, foliage plant, roses, that kind of thing. So the little ephemeral ones are the ones that have, like grandchildren and great-grandchildren all in one season. They're absolutely mental. And I'm not good on the names of all of these things. I know what they look like. And there's one that has this sort of almost a star-shaped basal rosette of leaves, and then these very pretty little white flowers. And they're the ones that will just keep seeding everywhere, all over the place all year. And you do need to get these guys out, because they're just a nuisance. They can be composted, because they're going to be in the compost for maybe a year. It's going to be dark. They won't survive when they come back out. They will rot down. And the third type are the ones, I guess, like dandelions, that aren't going to be having multiple replication in one year, just your bog standard weeds. They need to be dug up carefully, and they can also be composted. So really, the only things you don't want to go in your compost bins are your perennial weeds, so nettles, bindweed, and mare's tail, and ground elder. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to everybody. What I would also say is that I don't worry too much about little weeds during the course of the season. It's important to keep control of things and know the type of weeds that you're dealing with, but it's also important that you have ground cover. You don't want to have bare earth anywhere. So if you end up with, say, like I did last year, like 10-foot tall sunflowers, they had a carpet of weeds at their base, which were pretty much didn't get very much light and didn't get much care or attention, but they were great because they just protected the soil. What you don't want is rains coming down and splashing against the soil, A, because you don't want to get muddy splashes on your leaves or your flowers, and B, you don't want nutrients washing away, and you don't want any of the soil washing away. So if you end up with some weeds that are just protecting the soil, I think that is more beneficial than trying to clear all the weeds away and having this kind of immaculate looking plot. Now, if you've got fears about the weeds taking over and you're not confident identifying what is what, or you haven't got time to do all of that, then intercrop. And by that I mean sow things amongst your cut flowers which will be cultivatable by you. So you could sow lettuces, you could sow chard or spinach. There's perpetual spinach and an annual spinach. Just useful little plants that you can sow around your cut flowers that are going to act as ground cover, and also you can cut them and eat them. They're going to be useful. So they'll protect the soil. They may or may not outcompete the weeds. Depends how aggressive your weeds are. But they'll keep the soil covered, and that's the most important thing that we want, which will also help to keep the soil nice and moist as well. This is another good reason for always having some form of ground cover. Keep the surface of the soil nice and moist. You don't want it to dry out. That is quite important. So thank you, Shirley, for asking that question. I hope the answer is useful to everybody, and I hope it's particularly useful to you. So thank you. So maybe as we're talking about weeds, I should mention use of weed killers, pesticides, insecticides while we're discussing it. So I've gardened organically for 8 or 9 years. I don't like to use any chemicals whatsoever. It's very much a personal preference, and for me it's super important. So there was an opportunity up here at the field when I was faced with what looked like mile after mile of nettles last year, and a few people said, oh, just glyphosate them. Just put glyphosate down, it goes off, it doesn't last very long, doesn't stay in the soil, doesn't damage anything, it'll get rid of the weeds. And I'm a hard no for chemicals. I just refuse to use them. I don't care what the manufacturers say. Half the time they'd have you believe that these things just do no harm to anything or anybody, but their stuff is really, really nasty. So I can't recommend, or I wouldn't recommend, anybody uses weed killers to clear their plot. I think the residues do an awful lot of damage, and I'm not an expert, so please nobody sue me, but I'm just giving you my opinion. I also don't use any kind of pesticides or insecticides or chemicals, because everything has a knock-on effect for anything else, and I just cannot see the point of putting these horrible poisons on our soil. There are so many different ways to alleviate problems without the use of chemicals, which are also quite expensive, that have really nasty side effects. We don't know what the impact of the runoff is going to be. And when you think about how your soil is absolutely jam-packed with billions of bacteria, fungi, little insects and creatures and bugs that are all living in there, all serving a really, really important purpose. Never mind all the things like ladybirds and dragonflies and everything that's on the surface that's flying around. I would not advocate using any chemicals whatsoever. So the way I see it is you do it the hard way, you dig stuff up, or if you've got time on your hands and you can afford to cover everything in a dark material, then you could suppress the light on the weeds and kill them that way. But I haven't got sort of 4 or 5 years to wait for that to happen, so I'm quite comfortable digging mine up. It's also really good exercise. So if you can, avoid using the chemicals. It's something you might want to think about at the start of your season, and just decide what is your outlook on using chemicals on your plot. And if it's something that you feel strongly about and you don't want to do it like me, then make sure you tell people that you sell your flowers to. I think it's a real bonus to have cut flowers and vegetables that are produced without any nasty chemicals, that are completely natural. So much of what we have imported into the UK has undergone a number of treatments, really, really, really nasty chemicals that will still be on the flowers when they get into your house. And we don't yet really understand what the consequences of those are going to be for the end user. I dread to think what it's like for the people who actually work with these chemicals and spray them. So for me, that's one of my selling points. I've told people very early on that I garden organically. I don't use any chemicals whatsoever. Nothing is treated. And I know that I would rather have cut flowers that haven't been treated. It's entirely up to you, but make that decision and then stick to it, and then use it as a selling point if you're not going to be using chemicals. I'd also like to give a really massive shout out to one of my listeners, Spencer, who I understand is really enjoying listening to the podcasts and particularly enjoying the music. So thank you, Spencer, and thank you very much for leaving such a kind review. I'm sure that's going to be really helpful for other people when they're listening and trying to decide if this podcast might be for them. So thank you, Spencer. Well, that's it for today. Please join me next time and do subscribe so I know you're listening. My contact details are in the show notes, and I'd love to hear from you if you have a question you'd like me to answer on the show. Until next time.